After the wreckage of the Gateway Station cancellation, let's not call it a pause, the station is gone and it's not coming back, Europe needs to make a decision. It has spent billions of euros on the Artemis program with nothing of value to show, at least in space. It has 0 astronauts going to Gateway, since it's now cancelled, and it has 0 astronauts going to the surface of the moon, while costing European taxpayers over 2 billion euros. This can't continue. I'm going to make the case for Europe to make its own pivot, away from the NASA Artemis program and towards sovereign access to space. Hey everyone, quick thing before we dive in. Join my weekly live stream this Saturday. It's a community of space nerds discussing the news about space startups, including rocket launch companies, the orbital economy, and lunar development. I recap all my videos this week, reading out some of the best comments from viewers and answering chat messages. Ask me anything on any space topic, or just chat amongst yourselves about the latest space happenings. So drop your comment right after watching this video, and I'll see you this weekend for the full recap and live Q&A. Find the live stream link in the pinned comment below. First, let's examine the relationship between the US and Europe. Have US-Europe relations reached a breaking point? Relations between the US and Europe used to be positive. Let's look at how NASA described its partnership with Europe during the construction and operation of the International Space Station. Official NASA publications at the time emphasized equality, joint decision-making, and collective achievement. Let's have a look at a snippet of text from the 1998 NASA-ESA Memorandum of Understanding concerning the International Space Station. It says, expand cooperation through the establishment of a long-term and mutually beneficial relationship, promote the peaceful use of outer space, and agreement on the basis of a genuine partnership for peaceful purposes, unquote. Contrast that with today. The US administration and NASA itself now glorify US dominance. They talk about US space superiority and force projection. Space and the moon are now about security, controlling resources, and protecting US national interests. It's clear that US objectives have shifted from genuine partnership towards total dominance and control. Every other country must subordinate their future in space to Washington. US geopolitics. While I don't want to cover politics on this channel, geopolitics cannot be ignored because it's the main driver for Europe considering alternative approaches to space exploration and development. So let's look at some geopolitical events that have made Europe question the wisdom of remaining a junior partner to the US space program. Greenland, a block of ice. In January 2026, the US threatened tariffs of 10 to 25% on 8 European countries unless they supported the US takeover of Greenland. The demand escalated with the US threatening to use its military to invade Greenland, European sovereign territory. Canada, 51st state. The US administration made repeated public statements about Canada being the 51st state. The US mocked Canada by calling their leader a governor. Tariffs and threats against Canada have been made constantly, causing damage and disruption to their economy. Resource blockades in international waters. At the time of this video, the US Navy is blockading the flow of oil in international waters, causing massive disruption to the global economy. Several European countries will face severe economic problems and likely political instability, as can be seen in Ireland, as a direct consequence of US actions. ITAR, tariffs and tech restrictions. Long-standing technology regulations in the US have hampered Europe's access to US technology, with new tariff rounds threatening more damage to European economies. ITAR in particular is harmful to joint projects, making it difficult for Europe to work with US companies. European public opinion. A poll in March 2026 across 6 major European countries found 36% of respondents view the US as a threat, compared to only 29% for China. Only 12% of Europeans consider the US to be a close ally. This shift is caused by the increasing belligerence, animosity, and the near constant barrage of threats that come from across the Atlantic. The US has a well-established pattern of using its economic, technology, and military leverage against allies. The problem: lack of sovereign access to space. Europe's problem is it has no sovereign access to space for European astronauts. While it has Ariane 6 and the smaller Vega C launch vehicles, it has no space station, crew or cargo vehicles. No consultation on issues that affect Europe. This results in the US being able to unilaterally make changes to major programs that affect Europe without any consultation, as happened with the Gateway pivot. Europe's spending on the Artemis program. The financial ledger on the European expenditure on Gateway is damning. ESA committed €1.49 billion to ESMs, or European Service Modules, used to power the Orion capsule on its journey around the Moon. Gateway hardware alone has cost Europe €787.5 million, with €327 million spent on the IHAB habitation module. Europe had a barter agreement with NASA. In exchange for the Gateway hardware, it would receive 3 crew seats on flights to the Gateway station. No European astronauts currently manifested for any Artemis lunar missions. As of today, there are no European astronauts manifested on any Artemis missions, despite the enormous amount of money European taxpayers have paid towards it. Despite the importance of the European Service Module for the Artemis 2 mission, no European astronauts were on board. European taxpayers are funding critical Artemis hardware with no guaranteed European seats on any future flight. US keeps making unilateral changes. NASA is repeatedly making changes to joint missions with Europe unilaterally. It's not only the Artemis program. For instance, the Mars sample return mission that includes European hardware will likely be re-architected or cancelled outright, all without any European input. Europe appears to be a junior partner that's constantly ignored. They are reduced to watching North American astronauts go around the Moon while paying the bill. It's not a good sign when the ESA director has to go to the US and ask, what is the counter value that Europe needs to bring to get seats on future missions after spending so much money already with nothing to show for it? The US wants to dominate space. On the 18th of December 2025, President Trump signed an executive order titled Ensuring American Space Superiority. It's a co-directive for the US government, including NASA, which in theory is committed to the civilian use of space. Space is to be used by the US for strength, security, and prosperity. NASA, a civilian organization, has publicly aligned itself with this policy. Now we've outlined the problem, let's look at a solution. The solution, a European-led space station. In reality, despite Artemis and the other US-led programs being described as partnerships, they are not. The US makes all decisions unilaterally. The partners are there to pay the bills, with a promise of an occasional European crew seat, subject to US approval. Europe needs to lead its own space programs, starting with a space station. All human exploration of space starts with establishing a foothold in space. That's what a space station is. It provides a destination for European cargo and crew vehicles. It creates a shirt-sleeve microgravity environment for technology demonstrations, science, and orbital manufacturing. Funding a space station boosts all European startups, whether science and technology development, rocket launch companies, or cargo and crew vehicles. In addition, an orbital outpost in low Earth orbit indirectly supports the orbital economy, including space tugs, refueling in space, orbital debris management, space situational awareness, and many other space-related services. As NASA has recently stated, there is no viable commercial market for space stations at the moment. This is the moment for Europe to separate from decades of junior partnership with the US and build its own station. Scenario 3. In February 2026, ESA initiated a study on the post-ISS future for Europe. 3 scenarios are to be considered. Scenario 1. No European infrastructure investment. Reliance on commercial space stations. Scenario 2. The baseline option. Hybrid use of commercial space stations with European elements. And Scenario 3. European initiative for a low Earth orbit outpost with international partners. The station will be independently developed and operated by a European consortium. Let's consider the merits of Europe establishing an outpost in low Earth orbit. Strong and growing backing for a European-led space station. ESA has consistently called for strategic autonomy, resilience, and European leadership. Given the state of relations between the US and Europe, it seems likely that today, European capitals understand the importance of sovereign access to space and reducing or eliminating reliance on the US. ESA recently received a record budget for the 2026 to 2028 period. At the same time, the US administration is proposing massive cuts to the NASA budget. Europe already has a number of programs directly relevant to a space station underway. For instance, an LEO cargo return service contract, a crew launch abort demonstrator to crew rate Ariane 6, and the European Launcher Challenge to boost European space startups working on orbital launch vehicles, delivering science, infrastructure, and jobs for Europeans. There are many European space startups, companies, universities, and government agencies that could benefit from a European outpost in low Earth orbit. With a growing orbital economy, including the manufacture of pharmaceuticals, new, stronger, and purer alloys, space tugs, and orbital refueling, space has never been more important to the future of the economy. Having access to space rest on the whim of an increasingly belligerent and capricious US does not seem like a smart move. Better value for European taxpayers. Europeans are heavily taxed already. Seeing billions of euros spent on programs that don't seem to benefit Europe at all is getting harder to justify. With the increasing negative view of US throughout Europe, partnering with the US is not only risky, it undermines sovereignty, making Europe dependent on a transactional US which demands total fealty or else. Let's consider whether Europe can actually build an orbiting space station. We'll examine the technical and financial feasibility. Can Europe build a space station? A European space station in low Earth orbit requires that European countries must have the technical ability to design, build, launch, and operate the station, as well as the financial backing to complete the project. We'll also look at which European companies would likely be involved. Technical ability. We can easily answer that question. Yes, Europe can build a space station. Europe has many companies, big and small, that have practical experience of operating space station modules and systems in space. With Ariane 6 and Vega C, Europe is able to launch modules into space, docking them together one at a time to complete orbital assembly of a space station. European primes and startups. Let's start with the big two primes who are very likely to be involved in building a European space station, Airbus and Thales Alenia Space. These are both massive aerospace companies with decades of experience manufacturing space hardware. Thales Alenia has perhaps more experience building and developing orbital infrastructure than any other company. Their experience includes constructing Nodes 2 and 3, the Columbus laboratory structure, and the cupola, to name some of the modules they added to the International Space Station. Thales was either the prime or co-prime for European hardware built for the Gateway Station. In addition, they're building space station modules for Axiom Space and possibly Orbital Reef. In addition to orbital infrastructure, they're providing critical infrastructure for the Artemis base camp, namely the multi-purpose habitat, the habitation module needed for extended stays on the lunar surface. Airbus is the prime contractor for all 6 of the European surface modules that provide propulsion, power, and thermal control for Orion capsules. This gives Airbus unmatched experience building flight systems that can carry and sustain crew into deep space. Airbus is responsible for the primary structure of Starlab, a commercial space station under development. Some of the early hardware is currently in manufacturing. The A-Loop concept, designed for a European space station post-ISS, was delivered to ESA by Airbus. The station comprises a habitation deck, crew quarters, exercise facilities, science deck with airlock, and payload racks. Let's look at some smaller startups and European companies that would likely be involved in a European space station. LIQUIFER. LIQUIFER has experience designing and building space hardware, especially crew systems. They were involved in the A-Loop study along with Airbus. The company also worked on the OHAB design, an inflatable habitat concept including crew quarters and workstations. For Starlab, they're co-engineering the crew quarters, toilet and hygiene stations. For the Gateway Station, the company built full-scale mock-ups for human in-the-loop testing for the IHAB module. All of this experience is directly transferable to a European space station. Spartan Space. Spartan Space has expertise with modular deployable habitats. They're also working on IVA spacesuits for European astronauts. It's a type of spacesuit for use inside a crew vehicle or space station. This suit is scheduled to arrive on the ISS next month to validate its performance in microgravity. Sophie Adano, a European astronaut currently on board the ISS, will be performing the test. This removes European dependence on NASA or commercial US spacesuits. Spartan has already contributed to mock-ups and airlock studies with the French Space Agency and Airbus. Spartan was a prime for the OHAB study with LIQUIFER to develop an inflatable low Earth orbit habitat concept. You can see this inflatable habitat attached to the A-Loop station, with, for some reason, an Orion capsule docked to the station. Spartan Space is working on inflatable habitats for the Moon, having built full-scale mock-ups of a EuroHab inflatable habitat. This design is now moving towards qualified flight hardware. In addition, the company has contributed to airlock studies, with Thales Alenia and the IHAB mock-up by LIQUIFER. Europe has companies capable of building a space station, but what about supplying the station with cargo and crew? Well, a number of European space startups are working on or have designs for these types of vehicles. The Exploration Company. The number one European startup working on cargo and crew capsules is the Exploration Company. They have a contract with ESA already to fly a cargo mission to the ISS. This company is a pure-play cargo and eventually crew vehicle manufacturer with established European supply chains. Subscale demonstrator vehicles have already flown, with hardware for its next structural test model already under construction. Splashdown tests of a subscale vehicle were carried out in January 2026, with 20 tests performed from different heights, speeds, and calmness of water. PLD Space. PLD Space is a leading European rocket launch company with its Mura 5 orbital vehicle expected to fly later this year. In addition to rockets, they have plans for cargo and crew capsules. Their Project Linz is specifically designed as a commercial crewed spacecraft. Drop tests are planned soon, with an uncrewed orbital flight planned for 2028, followed by crewed missions in 2030. These dates seem ambitious and are likely to slip given the company's focus on their orbital vehicle. Rocket Factory Augsburg, or RFA. RFA is a European startup building orbital rockets, with an initial flight planned for later this year. It also has ambitions to fly a cargo vehicle called Argo. This would be a low-cost, reusable European cargo capsule offering an end-to-end low Earth orbit delivery and return capability. It returns cargo using Atmos's inflatable atmospheric decelerator technology. First demonstration of this vehicle is expected in 2028, with commercial operations starting in 2029. These European startups provide the logistical backbone for a European space station. With additional funding provided by diverting funding from Artemis, these plans could be accelerated, bringing the vehicles into service earlier and providing the option for crewed missions at a later date. With sufficient funding, it's entirely possible to eliminate US dependencies in all needed space operations, including launch, cargo and crew vehicles to support a European space station in low Earth orbit. Financial ability. ESA's budget over the next 3 years will be 22.3 billion euros. That's a 31% increase over the previous period. This is driven by Europe's need for space situational awareness, communications and imaging services directly tied to the security environment. Europe understands that it needs sovereignty in space, which is the reason the budget has increased so much. A European-led space station directly aligns with the need for European sovereignty in space. It would result in all jobs, hardware and technology staying in Europe. Missions in low Earth orbit are dramatically cheaper than lunar missions. Europe already provides large sums of money to sustain the International Space Station, which is due to be deorbited by 2032, if not sooner. A European-led space station would deliver continuous science, flight opportunities, technology progress, microgravity research, and commercial manufacturing capability to Europeans 24/7, a far more efficient use of European taxpayers' money than the ISS or Artemis. The highest operational benefit per euro spent is with a European space station. International partners. Europe would not operate or even build the station alone. In the study for the European Space Station, both Canada and Japan are explicitly mentioned. Let's examine international partners for a European space station. Canada. Canada is already an associate member of ESA and is able to take part in ESA projects, including receiving funding. Canadarm3, built at enormous expense by Canada for use on the Lunar station, is now useless thanks to the unilateral cancellation of Gateway by NASA. This robotic arm and other hardware and systems could be used on a European space station instead. Canada, perhaps more than any other country, has faced hostility and threatening behavior from the US. Canada knows it needs to diversify from the US, not just in economic terms, but also through technology. Hence, they launched the North program to build sovereign launch capability by 2028. Japan. Japan is also looking to diversify from US technology. That is why it joined the 6th generation fighter program with the UK and Italy. The US has not given Japan the software access needed to update fighter aircraft systems, which has left Japan frustrated and unsatisfied with the level of US control over key technology. ESA and JAXA have good communications and have worked together on the IHAB module for the Gateway Station. On the Starlab space station, both Europe and Japan are contributing. Airbus from Europe, with Mitsubishi representing Japanese interests. Japan would be a natural partner for Europe, and their H3 launch vehicle could resupply the space station in exchange for Japanese astronauts flying to the station or usage rights on board. New partner, India. Europe recently signed a comprehensive trade agreement with India, which explicitly included technology cooperation, providing an easy way for both regions to work together in space. ESA and ISRO, the Indian Space Agency, have a good working relationship already, and India has a keen interest in human spaceflight. India is working on their own space station and crew vehicles. India operates its own launch vehicle and can resupply a European space station with a barter agreement for crew and use of hardware on board the station. Final thoughts. Thinking in terms of operational benefits per euro spent, it's hard to see any program better suited to supporting the European space ecosystem than a space station. It directly supports European launchers, crew and cargo vehicles, the in-space economy, microgravity experiments and human exploration, all while keeping taxpayers' money in Europe, supporting jobs, companies and technology for Europe and its international partners. Is it time for Europe to pivot towards building and operating its own space station? Why is Europe funding someone else's moon program that delivers no European astronauts to the moon or anywhere else? Should Europe use the expanded ESA budget to support sovereign access to space? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this space video, consider buying me a coffee to help fund more episodes like this. The link is in the description. Watch the weekly live stream to see the images, clips and slides from this week's videos. It's a live Q&A on this week's space topics where I read out some of the best comments. The more people join, the more fun the live stream is. Be sure to like and subscribe so you will see our upcoming videos. We make videos every week covering the space industry with an emphasis on the smaller space startups that aren't covered so well on other channels. See you soon.